What can bring us to our knees? Does Jesus really care? And what will lead the world to God? This remarkable scene from the gospel answers each of these three questions. What brings us to our knees? Does Jesus care? And what will lead the world to God? And so that first question, what can bring you and I to our knees? What can initiate our seeking after the Lord? That's a good question for us to reflect on. In my life, in our lives, when have we most adamantly sought after the Lord? What has brought that about? What events or circumstances have led me to my knees? Has it ever been the experience of suffering, personal suffering? Has that ever brought us to our knees? In my life, the answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. And actually, I must admit, I don't think it was until I had really felt suffering, had personal anguish, pressing upon me, that I was really sincerely brought to my knees. I think apparent invincibleness, comfort, it held me from going to God. And there's different stages in our life where we might be more in that sort of illusion that I'm okay. I don't really need God. For me, elementary school, middle school, high school, because of this sort of apparent self-sufficiency and comfort, things going good, I'm not sure I really ever sincerely went down on my knees before God. It's rather comfortable, standing up by myself. But the time came, and we know the time comes when we're perhaps even overwhelmed by suffering. I was 19 or 20 years old, and I was in a foreign country. This is the farthest I'd ever been away from home, and for the longest period of time. It was, across the sea, more than 4,000 miles away from home. And I was sincerely homesick. But more than being homesick, what I would say is I experienced the darkness, of anxiety and a sort of depression. And there's such a stigma, and we can really impose that stigma ourselves, but such a stigma with this kind of or this sort of ailment. Perhaps like leprosy. You don't want people to know. You just want it to be hidden, covered up. But the thing is, I tell you, praise God, that in this, for the first time in my life, I sought the Lord because I knew I needed to there in England, I was studying abroad, a sophomore in college, faced with this personal suffering, I was brought to my knees. Our suffering can do that. It can actually draw us to the Lord. Like the leper who comes to Jesus and is brought to his knees, he's led there by his personal suffering. Okay, the next question. Does Jesus really actually care? We hear, moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him. That phrase, moved with pity. The language here is actually much stronger in the original, the Greek. More accurately, we'd say deeply moved with passion. From the depths of his being, roused with emotion. We might even say in anger. Jesus, he's angered at the consequences of that original sin. That suffering has come about. That death has come about. And so Jesus, he not only keeps his ground when the leper comes to him, he actually moves towards him, stretching out his hand, touching him. And we can't miss this. No one would touch a leper. No one would even let a leper be coming near to them. And that's why we had that first reading to reveal how passionately our God, Jesus, cares for you and me. He is willing to go outside of the bounds for you and for me. That Jesus, he actually wants to be with us in our suffering. And in the depths of his being, he cares. And for us to believe that, our God cares about all the sufferings you and I face. And then finally, briefly, what ultimately leads the world to God? It's you and me. It's our going out person by person. Perhaps that's what in our own lives we can identify people and their humble sharing of how God has impacted their life, or our seeing how God has impacted their life that has led us to God. For someone, us, to say, in my life, when I encountered Christ, this is what happened. I went to adoration, I went to Mass, and the Lord, he reached out to me in this way. He touched my life in this way. I went to the sacrament of confession, so broken, so wounded, so needing our God. And the Lord moved with compassion. He healed me. What can lead the world to God? This, our humble sharing of how God has touched us. This is what ultimately can lead the world to God.